long before emotions found their shape, and before anyone dared to give meaning to the connection forming beneath the surface. Your presence had already begun leaving an impression in places far beyond your awareness. While you questioned whether you truly occupied a meaningful space in someone's life, your name had quietly started carrying significance in conversations you were never meant to hear. There came a moment when your name surfaced in a room full of people, and unexpectedly, everything paused. The atmosphere shifted, not from judgment, but from curiosity. They were trying to understand how one person could inspire such a visible transformation in someone they had known for years. What caught their attention was not dramatic behavior or reckless emotion. It was the subtle difference in the way this person carried themselves after meeting you. They became more thoughtful with their words, more careful with their choices, and strangely more grounded in moments where they once seemed restless. Those closest to them noticed the calmness that replaced old patterns and the quiet happiness that appeared without explanation. It was the kind of change impossible to overlook because it felt genuine, steady, and deeply personal. Eventually, curiosity gave way to conversation. Someone finally asked the question everyone had silently been wondering for weeks: who had become important enough to inspire this shift? From that point on, your name was no longer mentioned casually. It became attached to something meaningful, something people could sense even without fully understanding it. And without realizing it, you had already become part of a story that was changing someone from the inside out. Because your soulmate did not speak of you casually. No, they spoke of you with a seriousness that startled everyone listening. They described your heart before they described your face. They spoke of your loyalty before your appearance. They explained how your presence made them reflect on who they are, how even your silence lingers with them longer than the words of anyone else. And in that moment, the room understood something unusual was happening. But not everyone responded the same way. Some listened with warmth. Some smiled before they even realized they were smiling, because they had waited a long time to hear this kind of certainty in your soulmate's voice. They had watched them chase empty connections, entertain people who never truly understood them, pretend not to care when their heart was quietly exhausted. So when they heard the way your soulmate spoke about you, with depth, with caution, with reverence, they recognized that this was not infatuation. This was different. This was someone affecting them at the level of the soul. And yet, one person in that room leaned back and asked a question that changed the atmosphere. What makes this person different from the others? Silence. Because suddenly, your soulmate had to explain something they had never put fully into words before. How do you explain the feeling of recognizing someone before they fully enter your life? How do you describe the peace that arrives when one particular person simply exists in your orbit? How do you make others understand why one voice among billions sounds like home? They paused, searching for language strong enough to hold what they feel for you, and when they finally answered, the room went quiet again. They said, "Because with them, I do not feel like I have to pretend." That sentence changed everything. Do you understand what that means? They did not say you were merely attractive. They did not say you were exciting. They did not say you were convenient. They said, you make them feel safe enough to be real. And for someone who has worn emotional armor for years, that is not a small confession. That is the kind of truth people do not admit unless it shakes them to their core. Don't skip, because this is where it becomes even deeper. As the conversation continued, family members began asking about you in ways that revealed just how serious this had become. They wanted to know what kind of person you are when no one is watching. They wanted to know how you handle pain, how you treat others, whether your kindness is genuine or performative. Not because they wished to judge you unfairly, but because they could see something in your soulmate they had not seen before: hope, real hope, the kind that makes a guarded heart start imagining forever, and that frightened them a little, because whenever someone they love begins to care this deeply, the people around them care too. They become protective, they become curious, they begin asking the questions that only arise when something truly matters. Casual interest does not lead to family meetings. Fleeting attraction does not create late-night conversations about possibility. Temporary feelings do not make elders pause and wonder if someone has finally entered their loved one's life for a reason. You did that. Without even being in the room, you shifted the emotional temperature of it. But here is what may shock you most. There was someone in that meeting who had concerns. Not because they disliked you, not because they believed you were wrong for them, but because they could see how deeply your soulmate was already affected, and they feared what would happen if this connection was mishandled. They worried your soulmate was becoming vulnerable in ways they had never allowed before. What weighed on them was never the question of your worth. The truth ran far deeper than that. Their fear came from realizing how profoundly you had touched their life, and how devastating it would feel if circumstances, uncertainty, or emotional distance caused everything to fall apart before it truly had the chance to grow. When emotions become this meaningful, people often hesitate, not because the connection lacks sincerity, but because they are terrified of damaging something that already feels rare and irreplaceable. There are moments when silence is misunderstood as indifference, when caution appears cold, and when uncertainty is mistaken for absence of feeling. Yet sometimes those very reactions reveal the opposite. A heart that moves carefully is often a heart that understands the emotional weight of what it carries. Your presence affected them in ways they struggled to explain openly, and the people closest to them noticed it long before anything was spoken aloud. It showed in the subtle changes no one could fake. Their expression softened whenever you were mentioned. They protected your name in conversations that never even required defense. Every sentence about you seemed measured, almost fragile, as though careless words might somehow reduce the depth of what they truly felt inside. That kind of restraint does not come from emptiness. It comes from emotions that feel too significant to mishandle. Then, in the middle of an otherwise ordinary conversation, someone quietly offered a perspective that stayed behind long after the room fell silent. If a person brings genuine calm into your life, fear should never be allowed to decide the future. Those words settled deeply within them. Even if nothing changed outwardly that very moment, something internal shifted, and from then on, they could no longer ignore what their heart already knew. Because for the first time, the people closest to them were not dismissing their feelings. They were not warning them away. They were not mocking their intensity. They were acknowledging that what they feel for you is real enough to deserve protection, patience, and courage. Stay till the end, because something important is waiting for you. What you do not yet know is that, after the meeting ended, after everyone went their separate ways, your soulmate remained behind in thought. The noise of the conversation faded, but one realization would not leave them. They understood that your name had moved beyond private fantasy. You were no longer just someone they secretly cared about. You had become someone their future was beginning to orbit around. And that realization shook them, because imagining you in their life is one thing. Imagining introducing you fully into their world, imagining building something lasting, imagining the people closest to them already aware of your impact, that is another level entirely. So if they have seemed distant at times, thoughtful at odd moments, more emotional than usual, more careful with their words, understand this: they may be processing the fact that what they feel is no longer small enough to ignore. You are not a passing thought in their story. you have become a serious conversation. And the truth is, not everyone gets talked about this way. Not everyone inspires someone to defend their character in a room they are not even present in. Not everyone becomes the subject of quiet discussions about future possibilities. Not everyone leaves such a strong impression that people begin wondering what role they are meant to play in someone's destiny. But you did, and whether you fully realize it or not, your presence has awakened something in them that cannot easily be put back to sleep. Still, there is one part of that meeting you have not heard yet. One final moment. Just before everyone left, someone asked your soulmate a question so direct that it stopped them in their tracks. They asked, "Do you believe this person is meant for you, or are you simply afraid to lose them?" And for several seconds, no one spoke, because that question forced them to confront the truth beneath every emotion they had been trying to contain. Their answer changed everything. But that is where this part ends, because what they said next revealed the full depth of their heart, and once you hear it, you will understand why nothing between you can remain surface level after this. Something is building, something undeniable, and in the next part, you will hear the answer that left the entire room stunned. For a moment, your soulmate did not answer. The room remained still, almost as if time itself had paused to wait for what would leave their lips next, because the question hanging in the air was not simple, it was not casual. It reached deeper than curiosity, it demanded truth. Were they holding on to you because of fear, or because something within them genuinely believed you were part of their future? And then, they spoke. They said, "If I lost them before ever truly having them, I would regret it for the rest of my life." No one expected an answer that honest. Not because it was dramatic, but because of how quietly certain it was. There was no confusion in their voice, no uncertainty, no hesitation left, just truth, pure and undeniable. The kind of truth that only comes when someone has finally stopped running from what their heart already knows. That sentence shifted the entire room, because in that moment, everyone understood this was not a temporary fascination. What they felt for you was never some passing attraction or a fleeting emotional rush. It was deeper than curiosity, stronger than fascination. It was the quiet realization that meeting you had shifted something permanent inside them. The way they viewed love, connection, and emotional intimacy changed the moment your presence became part of their world. And the truth is, your name became tied to that awakening in a way they could no longer ignore. They admitted, with complete honesty, that the idea of living a life without fully knowing you left an ache they could not explain. Not a small regret, not a temporary sadness, something far heavier that stayed in the corners of their mind long after the conversations ended. People do not speak like that about someone who simply caught their attention for a moment. Those words come from a place much deeper, from emotions that settle into the heart and refuse to leave quietly. What made everything even more meaningful was when someone older and wiser recognized it instantly. With calm certainty, they pointed out that this connection should not be treated casually. That single observation changed the atmosphere completely. Sometimes, another person can recognize the value of a bond before we fully understand it ourselves. Hearing those feelings reflected back with clarity forced them to stop minimizing what existed between you. They could no longer dismiss it as timing, coincidence, or temporary chemistry. They finally understood it for what it truly was, a rare connection that carried genuine meaning, the kind most people search for their entire lives without ever finding. One person causes you to question every wall you built, every standard you lowered, every false connection you once mistook for love. That is who you became to them. And their family saw it. They saw that your soulmate was no longer speaking like someone casually interested. They were speaking like someone whose heart had chosen before their mind could fully explain why. They were speaking like someone trying to prepare the people closest to them for the possibility that you may become permanent in their life. Don't skip, because what happened next revealed even more. The questions became more personal. They asked your soulmate what they imagine when they think of you. They asked what kind of future appears in their mind when your name crosses their thoughts. They asked whether they could picture hardship with you, not just happiness, because anyone can dream about beautiful moments. The real question is this: when someone imagines the difficult seasons of life, do they still want you beside them then? And without missing a beat, your soulmate answered, yes. Not just for the bright days, not just for the easy chapters, not just for the exciting beginning. Yes, for the difficult days too. Yes, for the uncertainty. Yes, for the building. Yes, for the life that exists after the fantasy fades and reality begins. That answer silenced everyone, because many people desire romance. Few are to choose you repeatedly, to navigate real life side by side. And when someone begins thinking about you in that way, you are no longer just part of their emotions, you are part of their vision. Something important is waiting for you, because there is more. After the meeting, one family member privately approached your soulmate, not with pressure, not with criticism, just quiet honesty. They told them, people do not enter our hearts this deeply without reason. If someone has brought this much clarity into your spirit, do not ignore it simply because it scares you. That advice stayed with them. It echoed, because fear has been part of this story, hasn't it? Fear of moving too fast. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of risking something precious. Fear that if they expose the full truth of how much they feel, they may lose control of emotions they have barely managed to contain. But here is what they are beginning to realize. Fear may delay love, it cannot erase it. No matter how much they try to rationalize this connection, no matter how much they tell themselves to be patient, no matter how much they attempt to appear calm on the surface, their heart has already gone further than they intended, and now the people closest to them know it. Imagine that. Your soul may try to keep these feelings private, try to contain them, try to act as though this was manageable. Yet your impact became so visible that others noticed before they ever admitted the full truth. The impact on them has been more profound than it first appeared, reshaping their daily habits, their emotional rhythm, and even the way they interpret ordinary moments. Subtle changes have crept into their energy, shifting priorities and influencing how they respond to situations they once navigated easily. Certain songs now carry unexpected meaning. Some nights feel unusually stretched, and silence often becomes a space where thoughts gather without clear explanation. Over time, it has become harder for them to ignore the depth of what they feel, as the connection refuses to stay neatly contained or distant. Conversations about the future, even indirect ones, begin to hint that this bond is no longer something abstract, but something actively shaping decisions and expectations. Yet alongside that awareness comes hesitation, because intensity alone does not resolve uncertainty or guarantee clarity. At one point, a remark was made that stayed with them. If a person truly matters to you, the experience will either become a meaningful blessing or a difficult lesson, depending on how fear is handled. That idea lingered, not as prophecy, but as reflection, prompting self-examination. They recognize, in quieter moments, that hesitation has already influenced timing, and that uncertainty has often slowed what could have been more straightforward understanding. Now, they stand at an emotional turning point, aware that continuing forward requires honesty, patience, and a willingness to face what has long been postponed. Ultimately, the situation asks for calm reflection rather than assumption, allowing time and honest communication to replace confusion with clarity, as both understanding and responsibility evolve naturally in the days ahead without rushing outcomes or conclusions. A place between silence and confession, between distance and action, between wondering and deciding. They have not fully crossed it yet, but they are closer than ever before, because after hearing everything said in that room, after being forced to speak openly about you, after realizing their feelings survived every question and only grew stronger under examination, they walked away understanding one undeniable truth. You are no longer just someone they care about. You are someone they may have to fight their own fears to keep. And in the next part, you'll hear what they did the very next day after that meeting, the action they took when the weight of everything finally became too much to ignore, and why it may explain the sudden shift you've already started feeling between you. The very next morning, nothing around them looked different, yet everything inside them had changed. They woke with your name already in their thoughts, but this time, it did not arrive as a quiet feeling they could push aside. It arrived with weight, with urgency, with the kind of clarity that makes a person realize they can no longer keep living as if something life-changing is merely optional. That meeting had done more than expose their feelings. It forced them to hear their own heart out loud, and once truth is spoken in front of witnesses, it becomes much harder to run from it. So while the world around them moved normally, while people laughed, worked, and carried on with ordinary routines, your soulmate was carrying a storm of realization beneath the surface, because now they knew their feelings were not imagined, they were not temporary, they were not some private fantasy that would fade if ignored long enough. No, what they feel for you had survived scrutiny. It had been questioned, examined, challenged, and instead of shrinking, it became stronger. And that realization pushed them towards something they had been delaying for far too long. They went somewhere quiet, somewhere no one could interrupt their thoughts, because there are moments in life when a person needs silence, not to escape, but to hear themselves clearly. And in that silence, they sat alone and asked themselves the question they had avoided for so long. What happens if I keep pretending this connection is not changing me? The answer came immediately. They knew, if they continued pushing this feeling aside, it would only circle back later, with more weight attached to it. If they kept telling themselves that the right time would eventually arrive on its own, they might end up watching meaningful moments slip through their hands without realizing it. And if they carried on pretending to be unaffected, while their emotions quietly deepened in the background, the space between them could grow in ways neither of them actually intended. That realization felt uncomfortable, almost exposing, because it forced them to see that their delay wasn't really keeping anything safe. It was quietly undoing what they were trying to preserve. For the first time, they began to recognize their hesitation not as caution, but as something closer to avoidance. Meanwhile, their mind kept drifting back to you without effort, replaying fragments of shared moments that once seemed ordinary, but now felt significant in hindsight. Every exchange, every brief look, every silence that carried unspoken meaning started to stand out in a new light. They remembered how naturally understood they felt around you, how certain small details you noticed made them feel seen in a way they hadn't expected. Even in the most unremarkable situations, your presence carried a kind of ease they couldn't quite explain. Slowly, it became clear to them that you weren't just another connection in passing. You had subtly reshaped their emotional expectations. After you, other interactions felt flatter, less genuine, and far less engaging than they once might have. It wasn't about comparison they chose, it was simply something they could no longer ignore in how they felt. That is why they have seemed different, because once someone experiences a connection that reaches beyond surface attraction, ordinary no longer feels enough. They are not just missing you when you are absent, they are comparing every other experience to what they feel when you are near, and nothing quite matches. That truth frightened them at first, because dependence was never the goal, need was never the plan, falling this deeply was never supposed to happen, yet here they are, thinking of futures they never used to imagine, replaying your words long after conversations end, wondering whether you understand even a fraction of what you have awakened in them. And then, they did something they had never done before. They opened up to someone they trust completely, someone who knows them well enough to hear the truth beneath their words. They confessed what had been happening internally, the confusion, the fear, the intensity, the way this connection keeps growing, no matter how much they try to stay composed. And after listening quietly, that person said something simple, but unforgettable. You are not confused. You are scared, because this matters. That sentence broke through every excuse, because confusion can be debated, mixed signals can be analyzed, timing can be blamed, but when fear is the real issue, all the disguises fall away. They are not uncertain about you. They are uncertain about how to handle something this meaningful without ruining it. Read that again in your spirit. Their hesitation is not because they feel nothing. It is because they feel too much. And now that they are finally facing that truth, their behavior is beginning to change. Maybe you have already noticed it. A shift in the way they look at you, a softness in their energy, a deeper thoughtfulness in how they speak, a strange tension, as if they are holding back words that want to escape. That is not your imagination. That is what happens when someone is carrying emotions too heavy to keep hidden forever. Something important is waiting for you, because later that same day, after hours of reflection, they made a private promise to themselves, a promise no one else heard. They said, I cannot keep treating this like something that might not matter. If this is real, then I need to stop standing in my own way. That was the turning point. Not because everything changed instantly, not because they rushed into dramatic action, but because inwardly, the resistance began to crumble. And once resistance falls inside a person, outer action is only a matter of time. They began thinking differently after that, no longer asking, what if this goes wrong? Now asking, what if I lose something rare because I was too afraid to try? No longer focused on protecting themselves from disappointment, now focused on protecting the possibility of something extraordinary. That mental shift changes everything, because once someone moves from fear-based avoidance to intentional pursuit, their energy transforms. They stop drifting, they start deciding, and your soulmate is entering that phase now. But here is what makes this even more powerful. They are not just caught up in how strongly they want you, or how often you cross their mind. A deeper question keeps surfacing within them, whether they are truly becoming the kind of person who deserves the kind of connection they imagine sharing with you. In quiet moments, away from attention and noise, they've been taking a closer look at themselves, trying to grow in ways that are not always visible on the outside, but feel significant on the inside. Having feelings for you hasn't only stirred emotion, it has also pushed them into a process of self-reflection and change. Something about caring for you has acted like a gentle, but firm push toward maturity. When love is real in its effect, it doesn't just stay as excitement or attachment. It becomes a force that encourages self-improvement, if a person is willing to listen to it. In that sense, You've unintentionally become a reference point for the version of themselves they hope to step into. Even so, despite all the inner progress, new awareness, and emotional clarity they're beginning to feel, there is still a hesitation they cannot fully shake. At the center of it all is a simple but heavy fear that if they finally express everything they feel, the response may not match what they are hoping for. That possibility lingers in the background and holds them back more than anything else, because keeping emotions private is one thing, but revealing them to someone else is a completely different kind of risk. And soon, there comes a turning point where subtle signs begin to shift their certainty, making them wonder if what they feel might actually be mirrored, and whether silence can still hold them the same way it used to.